Hello, Sarah. Please welcome to SHKALA Forum. We are live in Kiev, from Kiev right now. Thank you for your time, for being with us, and of course for sharing your experience with the Ukrainian audience.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad to be here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, definitely.
Great. So should I just go on and go ahead?
Yes, right now you go ahead, and then we're returning to the studio live to answer some questions from the audience.
Wonderful. Okay, so just going to move quickly. You've been hearing a lot of really wonderful information today. What I'm going to talk about is how to apply behavioral science to your social and behavior change campaigns. So following up a little bit for those of you who saw Paul Dolan from the London School of Economics earlier, I studied with Paul and with one of the forum founders of SHKALA. So very happy to be here. I do work for a marketing and communications agency, Marketing for Change, and also write on the funeasypopular.com behavior change blog. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So what is behavioral science? You heard a lot from Paul today. Then at the very foundation, it's taking classical economics, which is the idea of what people should do if they were rational, and applying social sciences, psychology, sociology, anthropology, and others, which is what people actually do. Earlier today, Paul did talk about this book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. The Undoing Project is another great book to get at that same story in a little bit easier way. You may have heard of Predictably Irrational or Nudge or Blink by Madame Gladwell. These are all ways of telling us how people actually behave. So why is that important? Well, one thing that we learn is that in behavioral science, there are these two systems of thinking. System one, which is very efficient and fast and is your gut reaction, and system two, which is rational and slow. System one is 2 times 2 equals 4. System two is 222 times 222 equals, I don't know, I need a calculator. But the problem is that we spend most of our time talking to system two, the rational side of the mind, when system one is making most of the decisions. So our decision-making behavior, our decisions to do behaviors, our decision-making, which drives how we process information and whether and how we choose to act, is driven by all these biases and heuristics or mental shortcuts that affect how we take in information and act on it. And so understanding these biases and heuristics can really boost your behavior and social change campaign. So here's an example. So rational man, economics say more choice is always better. And how you get a choice doesn't matter. But we know for fact that too much choice makes people shut down and stop thinking. And also that if you are automatically opted in, so the checkbox on the opt-in for a 401k retirement savings plan, if that's automatically checked, then you're going to actually enroll. 20%, that means that 1 in 5 people is saving more for retirement than if they had too many choices. So how we present choice and how we do choice architecture, how we set up those choices are real drivers of behavior. So these are the building blocks of behavior change communication. So most of you who do market segmentation know this. First, you need to know who your audience is. Who do you need to talk to? Then you need to say, what are the primary things you need them to do? Because you don't want to just raise awareness. You want them to do something. And behavioral science is the why would they do that really? So really, why do human beings do what they do? So I mentioned my blog, Fun, Easy, Popular, and I'm going to talk about one of the biases that all of us here in this forum bring to our work, and that is the curse of knowledge. The problem with the curse of knowledge, or sometimes called the expert bias, is that you can't take out of your brain what you know. And so you come to every problem with this knowledge, and it's hard to remember what it's like to be a person who doesn't have that knowledge. So that's why an engineer will make a remote control with so many buttons you can't find stop and start. The problem with expert bias, it can lead to products, services, and behavior change interventions that only work for the people who made them, not the audience you're trying to reach. So here's an example. This is actually a famous campaign, but I love to take it because it's a beautifully done. It got lots of attention. But when you look at what the message is to people from the expert point of view, it's like, look, this is such a huge problem. It's changing everything about us. It's changing who we are. But for a citizen, they're like, well, when is this going to happen? I mean, I'm not going to turn into a fish for a million years. So I don't need to worry about this right now. And people always have many, many things to worry about. And your risk is probably not at the top of the list. Here's another one. This is a campaign to help people stop throwing trash. But the problem with this is what's called descriptive social norms, which is we're showing that lots of people do that. So from an expert point of view, it's look how terrible this problem is. But for an average person, it's like, look at all those people doing that. My little bit of won't make a difference either way. So there's no reason for me to act. So the typical approach to so many of our social and behavior change campaigns is to try and fill an information deficit, to fill more knowledge into people's heads. But we know from behavioral science that knowledge is important, but it's one piece. You heard earlier about social norms. There's also how you feel about things. There are environmental factors, which means how easy or hard is it to do the behavior? Do I have the exact right kind of knowledge and the skills and the confidence to do a behavior? And what are the perceived risks? What are the rewards? How far off in the future are those risks? So all these things go into making human decision making, and behavioral science knows that knowledge is important, but not the only thing. So my agency has broken this down into making behaviors what we call fun, easy, popular. So this is our behavioral science framework. So fun is rewards and feelings. You can kind of get risks in there and penalties. Easy is, do you have the skills, the confidence, the tools you need, either mental tools or physical tools? And popular is social norms and traditions. And so these are what we call behavioral determinants that drive what people do. So here's an example. The problem in this campaign was to get mothers to buy fewer sugary drinks, because we know sugary drinks drive obesity, which is a big problem and a growing problem for children. So from the expert point of view, or from the the information deficit point of view, it's like, let's tell mothers they're hurting their children, and let's assume that they don't know that sugar is bad. Well, we did research and we know moms knew that, but they've got so many things to worry about. This wasn't at the top of their list. So our approach was to do what we call reducing friction. We simply made it easier to make a shift. Instead of telling mother that sugar was killing their kids, we said, what's your favorite drink? Here, type it into this tool and we can find one that tastes just as good, that your kids won't fight you about, and it won't have as much sugar. So we just reduced friction and made it easier for them to take the behavior instead of trying to tell them what they already knew, which was sugar was bad for their kids. Here's another one. So fertilizer on lawns runs off the lawns, goes into lakes and springs, causes algae blooms. It's a terrible problem where I live in Florida. So this was one approach. It was a 20-page booklet on how to properly fertilize. And from experts on fertilizer and what's called nutrient pollution, this made total sense. Here is exactly how you fertilize. If you do it properly, then we will no longer have this nutrient pollution problem. The problem is, who do you know that wants to read 20 pages on how to throw fertilizer on your lawn? Nobody, except for the folks that made these, the expert bias. Those folks would read 20 pages on fertilizer. So instead, we did this approach. We made it simple, one behavior, don't fertilize in the summer when it rains, and we made it salient. We made it eye-catching, and we made it about something people cared about, which was not the water so much as how much fun that people in this area could have fun boating, swimming, or eating by an unpolluted lake. So choose fun, not fertilizer. So instead of 20 pages on how to fertilize exactly right, it's don't fertilize during the summer. So what we want you to do when you all are thinking about your social and behavior change campaigns, what we usually do is we're communicators. So we start with ourselves. And then we're like, what do we need people to know? So we insert our message so that the audience will think one thing and then do another. Well, when you're thinking about applying behavioral science, you want to focus on the behavior and then work backwards. So you want to start with, what are people doing? And why? What are they thinking? Who are the people who are most important to the campaign? Sometimes they're not the exact audience you want. For example, if you're doing teen driving safety, it actually might be their friends rather than the teen driver. So who exactly do you need to act? And then you do something. So you start from the behavior and then you work backwards. Okay, so this is about the pandemic, right? All right, so let's talk about that. Here are 3 tips for getting effective communications during the pandemic. Number 1 is reduce cognitive load. We are overwhelmed with information. Paul Dolan earlier talked about the focus effect. So people are really focused on all this pandemic information so that other important campaigns are falling to the wayside. So if you need people to pay attention, make it easy. Use fewer words, give them fewer steps, give them fewer choices, and use simpler visuals. It's just a very cluttered information environment right now. Tip number 2 is always show the behavior you want to see. I know people who have chosen bad behaviors because they learned how to do them. For example, surf a subway, which is riding on the outside of a subway. It's very dangerous. And there was a campaign to stop it. And they showed how it was done to show how risky it was. And then teens are like, oh, that's how you do it. I'm going to give that a try. So remembering that visuals speak louder than words. And so make sure that your visual is simple and showing the behavior you want to see. So, for example, not the behavior you don't. This is a very nice illustration of how not to wear a mask. I had to spend a lot of time to figure out all the different improper ways to wear a mask when really it's pretty simple. Over your nose, under your chin. That's it. Tight on your face if you can. But a visual like this actually makes it look like it's really hard to wear a mask behavior and all those people are doing it wrong. So it doesn't really matter if I do it wrong too. Remembering that people are distracted. This is probably the number 1 thing that we need to do. When we are focused on our campaign, that's all we're thinking about. But people read our materials and our messages in a very distracted environment. They're likely to skim. They're likely to take an image and walk away. So one of the things that happens, for example, is this. So many times, this is from my county, they were trying to bust coronavirus myths to make people know there are these myths out there. Here's the actual facts. Well, there's a problem with something, a behavioral bias called the continued influence effect. So what that means is the myth is already more embedded in people's mind. So when you reinforce that myth, it stays in their mind. And studies have shown not only that when you show people myths versus facts, about 2 weeks later, they remember the myth and not the fact because it's further embedded in the brain. And even worse, about a month later, if you contact them again, they remember the myth as a fact. So they have translated in their mind. It's that information is in their brain and you are reinforcing it. And if you look at this visual, if you are skimming this, like most people will, if you're just reading very quickly, you're going to look at those myths and that's all you're going to read. So you want to make sure that in your communications, your key information pops out the most. If people are skimming it, that's what we're going to see. And there's something that you may have heard called a truth sandwich, which is give the truth, state the myth, but not in the way people usually talk about it. So don't reinforce that behavior and then restate the truth so that the last thing they're remembering, peak end effect, the last thing they're remembering is the truth. So just a reminder again, it still comes back to this. Even in a pandemic, as Paul said, everything has changed and nothing has changed. And when it comes to the building blocks of behavior change information, who do you need to talk to? So who exactly is your target audience? Who is the person who can most impact this behavior? What exactly do you need them not just to know, but to do? And then really using behavioral science for why they would do that really. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
So, Sara, thank you so much for your speech, for your performance. Right now, I'm checking the questions for you from our audience. This is amazing. Thank you. the main question. Continue to check. Can you give more info about the sandwich?
So yes, the truth sandwich. So it's really important to remember that the thing that you highlight is the thing that people remember. So if you are dealing with a myth, so a myth is something that lots of people believe. They don't know why. There's usually a narrative in it. So there's something about it that makes it what we call salient, which is just basically that people pay attention to it. So when you're presenting the myth, you don't want to spend a lot of time on that because that's what people remember. So if you have, for example, one of the myths right now is masks don't make a difference. That's very popular among certain groups in America. So you say, trusted source, for example, doctors agree that masks prevent coronavirus. You may have heard early in the pandemic that it wasn't important, but now we know that it is. And again, here's a trusted source. So you make sure if you're doing a myth that the truth is on either side of it, and the myth isn't the most salient part, the thing that people will most remember.
Thank you. Next comment, such a profound presentation that no questions left. But we have a couple. So for the strategy, you have to create, you have to start with analyzing what you have to do, what you want to do, and then to create message. That's right?
Yes. So you want to start with the behavior rather than the audience, because often we've chosen the wrong audience. For example, I'm just going to sort of speak off the top of my head. But for example, if you want, I mentioned teen drivers. So we do some work in teen passenger safety. So how do teens be safe in a car? And there's research that shows that when teens get in a car with a teen driver, the more teens you put in the car, the more likely you are to have a fatal crash. So that's a lot. And a typical approach would be, hey, don't get in a car with another teenager, you're going to die. Well, you heard about teens. They have their own way of doing things. They need to be around other people when they can. And so a better way is to tap into something that teens care about, and they care about being a good friend. So we did a driver safety campaign that wasn't about the driver, who's the one who crashes the car, but it was about helping teens be a good friend by not distracting the driver. And there's all sorts of other things about it. We know people are very overconfident, young drivers especially. But tapping into that, we did a campaign called Drive Like a Friend. And then we talked about how to show that you are a good friend and how to take care of your friends by making sure that if they're new drivers, you're not distracting them, you're not turning the radio on, you are helping them navigate, things like that. And trying to limit the number of people in the car as well.
Thank you so much. Next one. If there is a grand myth already implanted, what would be the best way to start? For example, like with vaccination.
So vaccinations are difficult. I think vaccine hesitancy, I know that you have a focus, a talk just on that today. The thing to remember about vaccine hesitancy is a couple of things. It's a continuum. So on one side are people like me who can't wait to get the vaccine, just like, give it to me now. On the other side are people who it's dangerous, you're going to die. Those are what we call the anti-vaxxers. We just need to remember they're only about 12%. So they take up a lot of oxygen in the media space. They get a lot of attention. So one of the things that you want to do is, for example, when you highlight that in California yesterday, there was a demonstration that shut down the vaccinations because there are people who are spreading this myth that it's bad, right? And so all the focus of the media is on this demonstration, whereas you can surface a social norm, which is 30% can't wait to get it. Right? You can actually leverage scarcity right now. There's more vaccines desire. There's more people who want to get vaccines than vaccines are available. And so you can tell stories about people who are getting a vaccine, how they're so happy about it. And and what they're looking forward to. So what people care about is they do care about being healthy and dying, but we've got to make decisions every day about that. What they care more about is, can they hug their grandchildren, right? Can they safely visit a family member or go out in public? So telling, instead of always focusing on the 12%, who are going to be very, very hard to convince. We need to focus on the positive story. And then what happens is you've got this movable middle. You've got these people who are like, I'm not sure. I've heard some bad things. I've heard some good things. And so if all they're hearing is about the anti-vaxxers and their protests, they're like, oh, it must be bad. These people must know something. Whereas if you're talking about, you're also showing all these people who can't wait to get a vaccination and are getting a vaccination, and how it's making change in their day-to-day life. Then you tell the story a little bit. So it's a little bit about mask wearing. It's one of the problems with the media is I live in Florida where there are basically no restrictions. It's ridiculous. You can go into a restaurant right now. You can not wear a mask. But still, even here, I think 80+% are wearing masks because it's the sensible thing to do. So what the media will focus on is the packed bar or the beach, which is really not a problem, but the beach with all sorts of people crowded into it. And what they're not focusing alongside is the actual norm, which is most people are complying. So just being really aware of what our information says, but what it says about what people should expect and what other people like them do. So if other people like them are looking like they're scared of the vaccine, they might too. If other people like them can't wait to get in line, they might as well.
Thank you so much. One more question. What question I should ask myself to avoid wrong messaging in a campaign? Like in your examples.
Yeah, so it's really hard. So basically, it's whenever you can do concept testing. So you can use A/B testing for sure, but the best way, much harder to do in the pandemic, is to talk to your audience. So if you have a concept, if you have a campaign, and you can get it in front of the people, teens are great. You get something in front of a teen, and they will tell you exactly the opposite. I'll just give an example. So we love to tell teens how bad smoking is. It's gonna make you die. It's so unhealthy, all these things. And I've been in focus groups with teenagers, and the heavier smokers will tell you all the risk. They'll say it's got rat poison in it. It's terrible because there's two things. One, teens feel immortal. They don't feel like they're ever going to die. And two, for most teenagers, being old is actually worse than death. So when you're saying, be healthy, you'll live longer, they're like, oh my God, I don't want to be 40 ever. So remembering that also the kinds of teens who smoke are already seeking risk. And so one campaign we did was that we flipped it, and it was called the Truth Campaign, which is still going in America. But it was basically tapping into the teen self-standard of rebellion. But it helped them rebel against the tobacco companies who were tricking them into getting addicted instead of, rebelling by smoking. So long story short, know a lot about, as much as you can about behavioral science, and test your concepts if you can.
Thank you. And I think the last one, what social or communication theories should communicators know and take into account in communication campaigns?
There are many, many good social theories. There's the theory of planned behavior. I think one of them that's really important is something that's sometimes called the ecological or social ecological theory. And it's to remember that there are all these layers of change, right? So there's the individual at the beginning. You're asking one person to change their behavior. Then there's the next outer layer, which is their peer group, other people like them. Then there's the next outer layer, which is institutions, and then there's the next hour later, which is policy. So for example, let's say there was a campaign for a while to get girls in Afghanistan to go to school. So the campaigns were focused on the girls, so they want to go to school, but will their families let them? Okay, let's say their families let them, but are there schools that are safe to go to? Okay, let's say there are schools. Well, one of the ways that their schools are safe to go to is driven by policy. So it's to remember that behavior change is never made in a vacuum. So usually you want to be hitting on all places that you can. So there's often this dichotomy of, should we do individual behavior change? Should we do systems change? And the answer is yes. You need to change a policy, but you also need to really focus on helping it be individual people make good choices too. So long answer, it's tough. It's if it wasn't easy, we wouldn't be if it was easy, we wouldn't all be here. But I did want to flag, earlier someone had asked for resources for if you're interested in behavioral science. Of course, my blog, funeasypopular.com, but there's also a nonprofit magazine called behavioralscientist.org. They write really easy to read blogs about behavioral science that can help you understand how people might process information.
Thanks again. Thank you very much. Sara, I know that you have been already to Kyiv, but we're going to be absolutely happy to have you here once again when the pandemic is overcome. So you're more than welcome. See you later here in Kyiv.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.